And so the obvious question then becomes, well, what remains in this process? Why are we not moving forward in a more public way? Why are things not more overt? Why are we going overt in a sort of a subtle way and a way that is allowing the other side to continue to paint and contrive their narrative and brainwash people? And the true answer, I think, for many of us out there is we really just don't know. We can see that there is a struggle. We can see that there's a back and forth. We can see that there are power players and power plays that are happening and being made by those players. We can clearly see that there's a push pull, and there's a lot of confusion on how much is left and what needs to be done. So I'm here to say a couple of things first, and then we're going to get into the meat of our file. The first thing I'd like to say is that war is messy and it's ugly. And in this process, a number of special operations have been ongoing, and many of you out there already know, to identify hostage situations, networks of the slave cartels, different safe houses, different warehouses, different intersections, junctions, and points of interchange that happen to make up what we would call the black market system or the Kabbalist deep crime system. And so that entire system around the world is vast and enormous, and there is the equivalent of a civilization underground that has also been under assault by a contingent of patriotic militaries and military forces around the world, oftentimes who are split within their own fielded force and entire and armed forces itself, because we have the military industrial complex that plays into a lot of this corruption and treason and human trafficking and just general serious human rights abuses, right? And so those operations are continuing, whether we're getting any sort of alternative media attention to them or not. We just recently had a haul of pedophiles that was a global network. More than 200 individuals identified and arrested. The official numbers reported about the number of hostages that were rescued were not accurate. There were more than 100 hostages rescued in these operations, many of them children, many of them beaten ceremoniously and ritualistically. And that's why we had such a low number reported on the number of rescues in my own estimation. And so these rings, these networks, these deep crime syndicates all around the world and the different feeder hydras that play into them are still being assaulted in all key theaters. And what's worthy of noting is that while we have many governments that are in submission and many patriotic military players and patriotic individuals in trusted positions, as Q reminds us, the reason for all of that is because we have treasonous actors in many of these same theaters, in many of these same governments, in many of these same localities, in many of these same interagency offices, different, departments and deep budget divisions of things, right? We're still dealing with, getting the cockroaches to come all of the way out into the light, while we are also carrying forth the greatest expansive consciousness operation, expanding the consciousness operation that has ever been attempted in all of human history. And so the process, I think, is leading us to an inevitability. The enemy recognizes that what remains of enemy assets that are still hidden have to be deployed. They have to come out. They have to get in the fight. Because there is sort of a push to get all of this done. They know that their time is limited and short. They know that many people on their side are disappearing along the way, or are taking deals, or are going into submission, or they look a little different, and it's possible that they're not who they think that they are. And so we are playing an espionage war, if we can call it that, or we're waging an espionage war. And one of the things that happens in an espionage war is everyone gets the chance to show themselves. And so the process that we're living through right now is part of that process to isolate who are the real threat actors against we the people everywhere. Who pulls the chains? Who has the weapons? Who's stockpiling what? Where was it hidden? Who deployed it? How did they get the technology to do that? Where did it come from? Trace the origin, right? All of these things are necessary so that we can ensure no one escapes. Q tells us no one playing the game escapes. Well, how do you figure out who's playing the game? You have to lay out the game board and let them play and roll the dice. And so that's the process that we're living through right now. And I know that it's messy and it's very unfortunate and it's extremely tragic. And my heart goes out to everyone who's been affected by these things. I recently lost another another friend of the family of my own, here in our personal sphere due to this war, due to the big pharma aspect of this war. And so understanding that this process is necessary in some regards, because if anyone if any one of them with advanced capability or connections to advanced technology or a stockpile of some sort of evil substance, pathogen, or weapon system gets away, then we could end up very much in the same position again in just a generation or two. And we can't have that happen. We cannot allow that to happen. And so moving forward, we're going to see the normies' consciousness really pounded and really worked on. Let's go ahead and get right to it. As you can see on the screen here, I've put at the very top, pandemic number 2 and another forced vaccine reattempt is coming. That is my own personal estimation based on the research that I'm doing, and I'll share some of it with you now. Give me just a moment to pull it up. So we've been tracking, and Anons and Awakened Patriots have been tracking the rhetoric around new pandemics, different exercises and war games, such as catastrophic contagion, which lend themselves to the idea of a new pandemic. We have the World Economic Forum discussing the cyber poly crisis, or the cyber multifaceted crisis that's going to strike the world at some point. We also have the climate agenda, which takes health and pandemic preparedness into its framework and into its considerations, and overall Agenda 2030. A massive portion of that overall agenda is the forced vaccination campaign around the world, right? Now, these are all things that a person that has been watching CNN, MSNBC, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, these sorts of things, these are subjects that they're already, if they're listening to this broadcast, they're having a hard time continuing because they're not certain about the type of information, the quality of the information, and what all of this really means. Can these sorts of things actually be this diabolical? Can there actually be a coordinated effort to attack mankind? Was COVID-19 a bioweapon launched against mankind? The first shots of World War III, and sort of the culmination, the going overt of a conflict that began under the Trump presidency with special operations happening all around the world. I believe the answer to many of you out there listening, and if you've listened to any length of time, is clearly yes. But if someone is coming to the table with a lens of just now beginning to question what's out there, these sorts of topics are already making an unpleasant, an uncomfortable imprint, an uncomfortable association within the consciousness. And so that lends itself to some defensiveness, some self-preservation, some turning off the box, right? I turn off the TV. I can't take that anymore. So we're going to go ahead and just discuss some different things here. This is the evidence and research I'm using for these things from Bloomberg just a few days ago. Let me see here. What day is this? Actually, no, this was today, August 18th of 2023, from Bloomberg. Health officials warn of new highly mutated COVID strain BA.286 has been spotted in the U.S., Denmark, and Israel. Few cases reported so far. Virus has dozens of mutations. And then the rest of the article is behind a paywall. But the first part of it says a new COVID-19 lineage is being monitored by global health officials due to its large number of mutations that can make it tougher to prevent and treat. Coming over here, an article published 14 hours ago. The WHO is now tracking a new COVID variant, BA.X, amid fears it could lead to new explosion of cases. Case of the new highly mutated strain found in Israel, Denmark, and the USA. The WHO is monitoring a new coronavirus that could potentially lead to a rise in COVID-19 cases. BA.X, which is also known as BA.286, was placed under the health body's monitoring list on Thursday. This was just yesterday, due to the large number of mutations that it carries. Now, if you recall, just a few days ago, or actually it's been a couple of weeks ago now, the Russians came out after continuing their biological research, their research into biological weaponization and pathogenic development, in Ukraine. They came out and said that Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, and George Soros were the four main U.S.-based interests who helped create COVID-19 as a bioweapon in Ukraine, release it innocuously and anonymously around in another point of the world, thereby launching a biological pathogenic attack against mankind in a plot to take over world through destabilizing the world finance, the world commerce, and the world power structures. Quite a statement coming from the Russians, and they provided graphics to back it up. Now, what's fascinating is that on July 21st of 2023, Joe Biden did what we already knew was going to come. We already knew that this was going to come, right?